everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are continuing our discussion regarding the Kingdom of Judah, the country of Benin, and the former Kingdom of Dahomey. And so we are going to touch on a number of issues, and we're going to do this efficiently. We're going to primarily be looking at some maps, and we will have some sort of sidebar discussions about the implications of these historic maps. And even we are going to look at some of the popular culture issues such as Prince and Jodica in the context of this discussion. And we're going to look at the issue of the right of return and considering the question of the right of return of land versus simply the right to return to the land, or the right of return of the interest in the land, sort of like a constructive trust as we've spoke on before. Now, this is the gate of return in Benin, and it symbolizes the departure point primarily for those of the Kingdom of Judah, that kingdom that was sent off as that kingdom was taken over. And so this is the former ocean front for that kingdom. And interestingly, if you saw the movie The Black Panther, you will notice that the women were the Dahomey warriors, or they were symbolic of the Dahomey female warriors, and so sort of the nemesis of Jodica. And there was probably no mistake in putting that together in that film. It's likely that the filmmakers had a little bit more knowledge about history than most have. And if you've seen part 1 of this video series, you've noted that this is Hephan, the king of Judah, from the Kingdom of Judah in Africa. And if you're doing further research on this, please make note of the fact that he was born in 1695, because sometimes you will come across things that will talk about all sorts of things that he did as king that were inconceivable. Things that he did when he was perhaps 2, and things that he did when he was perhaps 7 as king. And again, they're inconceivable. So you really want to cross-reference things when you come across all sorts of data in terms of history. And you can even see when the artist did this rendering that even in his adult attire, he has an extremely immature face. All right, so we're going to look at the first map. This is a current map. So this is a recent map of what Benin looks like in current times. And so you can see pretty much what this portion of West Africa looks like now in terms of the geographic boundaries. You can see Ghana and Togo and Benin and Niger and Nigeria. Now, however, 200, 300, 400 years ago, it did not look like this. The landscape was not like this. This did not constitute the geographic, what you call international boundaries now. And so it looked a little different, and we're going to look at how it looked different, because as you can see, even though Hephan is pointing down to this former Kingdom of Judah, the former Kingdom of Judah no longer exists on this map. And the people who were in the space, they were in the Kingdom of Dahomey before it became Benin. Those were the Fawn people, also going by the name of the king who deposed Hephan and conquered Judah, which is Agaja. And please make note of the fact that there are related ethnic groups. Sometimes people refer to them as tribes, but related ethnic groups are nations. And so you can note that Haitians are among the related groups. So in terms of the Caribbean, in terms of the Americas, the related ethnic group on the western side of the Atlantic would be those of Haitian descent. Now, we do need to point out one important thing that I think people sometimes forget, or it gets kind of confusing. People sometimes think that when someone was sold into slavery by a particular group, that constitutes belonging to that group. So there might be a belief that since the ship picked people up in what is now Nigeria, that the individuals getting on the ship were Nigerians. And so you never really hear people talk about Agadez or anything like that in terms of the slave trade. So there's always this reference of West Africa, not even really Central West Africa, but West Africa in terms of identity. And that is a mistake, because oftentimes the people who they enslaved did not necessarily come from their own tribal spaces, their own nation, own ethnic groups. With respect to Haiti, however, there is a high percentage of individuals with Fawn ancestry. Now, this is another map. This one, however, shows you what the landscape looked like when Dahomey was Dahomey, and this is after the kingdom of Juda was conquered. And so you can see the map looks a little different on this one also, but it looks significantly closer to what the map looks like today. And so you can see that when the kingdom was Dahomey, you have Whydah down there at the bottom. It's just really on the coast there. And the entire coast became the slave coast next to the Gold Coast. And so the slave coast encompassed quite a bit of space there. And interestingly, even though you see Nigeria off to the right, you see that huge space up and off to the left, and you see the Oyo Kingdom, and you see Yoruba. And so that the size of that is indicative of that being a nation state in and of itself, and not simply a tribal group. Now, this is one of the reasons why you have to be very careful when you get information from Wikipedia. It's useful, but you have to be careful. So you need to reference things. You need to check the references of the Wikipedia postings and trace the reference, go to the reference to see if the reference is a valid one. In this instance, it's very interesting. It's just a lot of speculation about the history of Whydah, the history of Juda, the history of Juda. And so they talk about the Fawn people along with the neighboring people. They went to work in the Caribbean and on the coast of South America. And then it goes into this discussion about why they were initially called Whydah. And the fact is that those are not the same people. So the Fawn people were not the people in the kingdom of Judah. And so the Fawn people were the people who conquered the kingdom of Judah. And so they go on to say that, these names were there because Whydah meant that they were the people sold, by another group. And the word Whydah phonetically evolved into Rada. So it's very interesting, all of this interesting speculation about what this name is all about, where it came from, and why people may or may not have been called these names. And so one of the things they do point out, though, is that in addition to Haiti, in terms of the Fawn people, you can also find Fawn people primarily in Trinidad and the French Antilles. And while it's important to note where the Fawn people are located in the Western Hemisphere. It's also important to make note of the possible locations, well, the actual locations and the possible locations of those from the Kingdom of Judah that was dispersed and enslaved and the monarchs exiled. And here is a very interesting map. It's in the Library of Congress. It's a World Digital Library map, and it's an old map back in the 1700s, of course, and a map of Barbary and Nigritia and Guinea. And what's interesting about this map is that it is basically a remake, or just a reissue of a map from 1707. So you can get an idea of what this map looked like when Hefan arose to the throne as a child. And so you can see the actual place name. So you can see Whydah, Juda. You can also see Xavier. That Xavier is basically Xavier. So you might see that written as S-A-B-I. You might see that written as X-A-V-I-E-R. You may see it written as it is on the screen, and then you might see S-A-V-I. And so there are a number of iterations of that particular name also. But as you see on the screen, when Hefan rose to the throne and when Judah was just Judah, back in the early 1700s, before Dahomey took over Judah, it just had the name Judah, and it does not indicate it as a slave coast. And so it appears that it perhaps emerged as a slave coast once the Kingdom of Judah was rounded up and enslaved, and that became the sort of the identifier. It was the enslaved territory, so it perhaps became known as the slave coast somewhere around that time, the early 1700s. One of the other odd things about this map is that it notes that just north of the Whydah Juda thing there, you can see it right, it's right in the middle. You see the Euphrates River, and so it's unclear why that river is identified as the Euphrates River. There is some literature also that says that that particular river was known by Europeans as the Euphrates River. The Euphrates River on maps of current times, the river is far, far away and much further to the east. But this is very interesting. It could be something like the Amazon, where it previously is believed to have linked up with another water space in Africa. And so maybe this is something like that. The weird thing is that this Euphrates River notation disappears. It's a shell game of rivers now. That notation disappears on subsequent maps. All right, so we're just going to quickly make note of some of these ancient maps and where Judah is located. And so you have the Kingdom of Judah that is located actually on this map below the Kingdom of Dahomey. And it is not indicated as an actual kingdom on this particular map. And so it's just straightforward Judah. And you can see over to the right that there is a similar space known as Benin over to the right. And then you have the coast of Benin even further over, and then you have Biafra. And so what's clear is that this space known as Judah is not consistently understood as anything related to the slave coast. And so there apparently is some historical event that gave it this new identification. And here you can see yet another map where Judah is identified, and it's next to Benin again. However, there is no slave coast identifier. And here we have, it's interestingly labeled, it's labeled as the new and correct map of Negro land in Guinea. And in this new and corrected map, you have Whydah, you have the Kingdom of Whydah. You also have the Gold Coast next to it, the Tooth Coast, and the Grain Coast. And the identification of the Slave Coast is not big and glaring as the other coasts are. So apparently, again, something took place historically to change the total identity of this place from the Kingdom of Judah to the Kingdom of Whydah, which is a bird, by the way, and also changing it subsequently then to the Slave Coast. And so apparently what was most important at one point was grain, tooth, and gold. And so then slavery entered the scene. It's also interesting on this map, you notice the desert of Zeus. Yes, that is the desert of Zeus. If you look up the that word, that's exactly what that leads to. And also, if you look over to the far right, you'll see the Nile of the Negroes. And so it's a very interesting map here. It's also interesting to note that there is this division that's related to a desert. And in the desert area, you have Negro land, and then down below you have Guinea. And so clearly there is an understanding of these being, different spaces and also having different people. And as you can see here, it's 1729 map later on there. The Kingdom of Judah is gone now. And once the Kingdom of Judah is gone in terms of the bigger space, it's emerging as the Slave Coast. And so there still is, if you can look really closely, you can still see that it has Roy de Fida. You see the Dutch spelling of that, but you can see that the kingdom itself is diminished, and the focus is on slaves, and the focus is on gold next to it, and the focus is on grain. And so the biggest name, as you can see, is Benin there, and Guinea. And so everything else is pretty much sort of falling into the background there. And it's also important to note that this particular time, this 1729, is definitely the time around which Hephon was, that he died. There's some discrepancy about how that exactly occurred. One of the things that you might find in the literature is that he was offered by Agaja the opportunity to come back in some sort of capacity, and the negotiations apparently fell through, and Hephon was apparently not willing to concede the kingdom and concede the land. And as mentioned in the first video, there was an issue of not just enslavement of the Kingdom of Judah, but there was also the slaughter of the Kingdom of Judah in excess of 5,000 people. And what occurred basically is that those 5,000 individuals were used as a religious sacrifice. And this apparently was part of the conduct of war for Dahomey. And so what you have is, it's called the annual custom. And so this took place in the context of Judah, and then right after you have this new identity that emerges, which is a solid slave coast identity. And this is also the time during which it says, Dahomey was flourishing in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so this is the time of the takeover of the kingdom of Judah and the taking of the land and enslaving the kingdom. And let's just add here that if anyone is entertaining the idea of the right of return, meaning the return to the actual land, that's something that someone should seriously give second and third consideration to, particularly if someone has identified themselves as a descendant of this particular kingdom of Judah. The wisdom of transplanting a person, transplanting a family into that space, if that is the ancestral homeland, it would be a questionable decision given that history and given what's gone on in terms of that land. You talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. Well, this is some significant post-traumatic syndrome that might be going on, transplanting oneself back into a space that has been taken over in that way, and that if people identify that as their ancestral homeland, what happened to their ancestors and what is basically still there in terms of their ancestors, it would make it a questionable decision to go over and transplant oneself there in terms of a quote-unquote right of return. That should not, however, preclude people from entertaining the possibility of reparations in terms of a right of return of land, sort of the way that land has been returned in South Africa, or the way that land has been returned or reclaimed in Ethiopia, and perhaps some other places. And so be sort of like a right of return of land that you would have right in the United States. In terms of reservations, not that a reservation is recommended, but it would be a similar type of possibility, because you have a similar dynamic. You have the conquering of the land, the slaughtering of the people, and the removal of the people, and in many instances, the changing of their identity and their names. And here is another map that you can see where the kingdom went up to. And so the kingdom of Judah went all the way up into this mountainous area, as you can see. So it went pretty far up there, basically on up into bordering on Negro land. And so you can see that particular land. You can see what it was bordered by. Again, the Euphrates River has disappeared from this particular map. And you might also notice that when the kingdom of Judah turns into the kingdom of Whydah with yet another spelling, you can see over to the right on this map, they're very descriptive. So they're saying that this is from the direction where the slaves came from, where the enslaved people came from. You can see up top, they talk about where they carried gold off to Morocco. So Morocco was probably very busy. And so you can see a number of descriptors on this map. So it makes it a good map for that purpose. Okay, what we have here is the gate of no return and the ocean that is in front of or behind, depending on how you're looking at it, the gate of no return. And the gate of no return, this is a very strong message because no return, point of no return, basically means that point at which one must continue on one's course of action, which we've talked about before, because basically turning back is impossible. The direction is irreversible. In other words, the land has been taken. Those individuals who would have been ancestors or relatives, they are gone. There's really no one left behind, and the individuals, which in this case are the enslaved people, the message is that they need to continue going forward. They cannot come back. They cannot come home. And this is a very interesting gate part of the purpose of this gate is to collect revenue. It's definitely not something that individuals who would be descendants of that kingdom would find comforting in any particular way, shape, form, or fashion. And so again, that whole idea of a right of return becomes a questionable right. The right of abode becomes a very questionable right to request, particularly when it is the ancestral homeland of individuals who were enslaved and dispersed and exiled from that particular kingdom. It's very similar to what has taken place with indigenous people in other parts of the world, particularly in the West. Now, there are a few individuals, families going by the name of the king for the kingdom of Judah. And those surnames are located from England to Virginia. You have some in Louisiana, Texas, New York, and Connecticut. Now, usually when entities are exiled, there still is some identifier for them to be traceable and also to have them remain connected to their heritage. One thing to note about the kingdom of Judah and when the exile took place, one of the princes remained and stayed with Agajah in the kingdom of Dahomey. Now, there's a possibility that this took place. There's a lesson in this about choosing your marriage partners wisely. It's a possibility that that prince who requested to stay with Dahomey was, this is speculation, but pretty good speculation, was the grandson of Agajah, because, and here is that lesson about choosing your marital partners wisely. There is a historical oral tradition that the reason why the kingdom of Judah was conquered is because Hephon was married to the princess daughter of Agajah, and Agajah and his daughter conspired to put water on the gunpowder so that the kingdom of Judah could not defend itself. And so the story goes, according to the oral tradition, that she and her friends got together and conspiring with her father, which was her husband's enemy, and put water on the gunpowder so that when the kingdom of Judah was attacked, there was no way for them to defend themselves. And so it's possible that if there was a prince who went to Agajah during all of this, that prince may have perhaps been the child of the daughter. That's speculation. And so it's possible that there are some individuals that are remaining from that particular line of that family, that kingdom, that tribe. And so, of course, some of you are looking at this through the lens of scripture. And so what this looks like when you look at the lineage of Dahomey, and Dahomey's name is actually Dahomey, and you look at the lineage of people around that area, there is a lot of lineage that is related to the name Dan, but it's pronounced Don. And so it appears that in terms of lineage, that if you're looking at scripture, then that would be another kingdom, another tribe, and that tribe appears to be huge, and that tribe appears to span continents. And so there is a large number in Africa and also in Europe and what would be considered the Middle East. And so you can see all sorts of names that have like Don, Dan, Den, things like that. And they also have a narrative and oral tradition about the father of the people and a chief named Dan or Don. And so again, some of this does not look like, what took place does not look like normal slave trading practices. It looked very personal, and there was definitely a religious underpinning in terms of what was going on. In terms of the attack, in terms of there were some differences apparently in the religious traditions of these groups, but they appear to also be sort of like distant cousins at the same time. And then also adjacent, it appears that there was some even more distant cousins who were related to their ancestral father Jacob, and his brother Esau. So it's pretty big, and it looks really personal in terms of what these dynamics were that were going on. And as we wrap up, let's have a little conversation about another part of that oral tradition. According to the Whydah Museum, there is the understanding that when the kingdom of Judah, when these people who were enslaved were being sent off, that they were branded, and then they were marched around a tree known as the Tree of Forgetting. And the purpose of this marching around the tree was to create a source of amnesia, so that those who had been enslaved would basically forget about their lives prior to becoming enslaved, that they would forget about their homes, they would forget about their identity. This was, again, an unusual practice for simply enslaving someone. And so again, it has sort of a very personal tinge to it. And so basically they say that the men were walked around the tree 9 times and the women were walked around the tree 7 times. And there was another dynamic that took place whereby the slaughtering of the in excess of 5,000, so you've got almost a third of the population that was conquered and enslaved, that they involved the children in the slaughtering of the elders. And so there's a lot in that history that really needs to be unpacked. And it's clear that Benin has reached out to start that process of restoration. And again, this is where issues related to things like a truth commission come into play, because given the background of this particular slave trade with this particular kingdom, this type of dynamic does not lend itself to traditional forms of reparation. In fact, there is perhaps no possibility of true reparation when it comes to this particular situation, because just the nature of what took place. It's beyond simply having someone work for someone for free. It's beyond simply taking labor from someone. There was significantly something else going on here, and it is really beyond the traditional forms of reparation that might be available. And so it's very interesting that the Black Panther film used the narrative that it did, and that it had a character such as Njadika, who had been exiled and was not anticipated to return to Wakanda, which interestingly, Wakanda is, it's not just a fictitious place in the Marvel universe. Wakanda is actually a word and a place, a couple of places in America. So we can talk about that at another time. But what you have here is this dynamic of art imitating life, and Prince Njadika being that imitation of life. And while a number of people were very overjoyed about having the Dahomey Amazons as the main warriors combating Prince Njadaka. It's a testament to the real life narrative related to the transatlantic slave trade for a particular kingdom of people. And so it's probably not a narrative that should be taken as lightly as it has been, given the real life narrative related to some of the events surrounding the slave trade, Dahomey, Benin, the Amazons, and the kingdom of Juda. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.